Imagine being a single parent to 3 children, trapped in a lighthouse with barely any food in the winter of 1902. This is one of the stories I'll be covering, along with the histories of 2 lighthouses lost to vandalism and modernization, Passaic River and Bergen Point Lights. I'm Carolina, and welcome to the Lighthouse Narrative. Newark Bay is located in New Jersey of the United States, bordered by the cities of Elizabeth, Newark, Bayonne, and Jersey City. In the 1800s, Newark Bay was known as a hub for the fishing industry with extensive wetlands, where oysters and bass were harvested. As the 1900s approached, an economic boom would transform the bay into one of the largest shipping centers in the eastern United States. To protect these growing shipping interests, mariners of the bay requested lighthouses to be built at a cost of $5,000 each, which Congress approved on March 3, 1849. Afterward, Passaic River and Bergen Point Lights were built. At first, both lighthouses were poorly designed wooden structures that were eventually declared uninhabitable by 1855. Their foundations were decayed, causing the structures to settle inward. It wouldn't be until 1859 that they were rebuilt with stronger stone foundations and better designed framework. The estimated cost of the work totaled $20,000 for each lighthouse. Passaic River Light served 2 functions: 1 to mark the entrance to the Passaic River, and 2 to warn mariners to steer clear of the mudflats on the western side of the bay. The station had a rowboat, a fog bell, and a Fresnel lens, which was made from glass encased in a brass framework surrounding a light source, serving as a beacon. Its light was visible from 11 nautical miles away. 6th, 5th, and 4th order Fresnel lenses were used at Passaic River. Orders refer to the size of these types of lenses, of which there are officially 6, although 3 alternative sizes were added over the years. A 6th order is the smallest size, while a 1st order is the largest. Its first lighthouse keeper was Michael P. Nerney, who was given an annual salary of $400. And while much isn't known about his personal life, what we do know is that he was a harbor pilot, a retired sea captain, and a former member of the Newark whaling expedition. It was his persistence that allowed Passaic River Light to be constructed. When settled into his new role, Michael became a beloved keeper that locals and seamen often visited. He was more than happy to entertain his guests by spinning tales about the bay. When he was working, he diligently cleaned the lantern room and documented more than 100 ships passing by the lighthouse daily in his logbook, which was a common task done by keepers back in the day. Even though he was a popular figure, he was forced to retire in 1870 due to some political scheming, as he avidly protested against the construction of a new bridge across Newark Bay. He moved to the city of Newark, where he passed away in 1880. Aside from Michael, other notable keepers included the McKesson family, who held the position of lighthouse keeper for over 30 years. Dennis McKesson was an Irishman who came to America with his wife, Eliza, and their 3 children, Elizabeth, Hetty, and Hugh. In 1881, Dennis became the lighthouse keeper of Passaic River for $600 a year. His position was taken over by his wife when he passed away in 1903. During Eliza's service, Newark Bay experienced an explosion in population and rapid industrialization. What was once a popular spot for harvesting fish became a busy port and trading center, the bay's waters heavily polluted with industrial waste. Many of the channels connected to the bay, including the Passaic River, were altered by human intervention to support this increase in industry. As a result, Passaic River Light was decommissioned in 1914, as it was by then too far from the shifted river to be an effective navigational aid. At this time, the U.S. Lighthouse Service, the overlords of lighthouse maintenance, removed Passaic River's lantern room and fog bell. As for the McKesson family, Eliza was no longer a lighthouse keeper, but the service allowed her to remain as a custodian, which reduced her salary from $600 to $1 a year. Can you imagine making $1 a year? This $1 salary was passed on to her son Hugh when she passed away in 1914. As Hugh grew older, he became a popular topic in local newspapers in the early 1930s, dubbed the Hermit of Passaic River Light. At the time, he expressed his confusion to the Newark Evening News about this, not understanding why anyone would want to write about a lighthouse keeper without a light. He remained in the lighthouse until 1933. When he moved out, the lighthouse was considered abandoned. On August 16, 1935, vandals broke in and burned it to the ground, ending more than 60 years of faithful service to the Newark Bay. South of Newark Bay is a channel known as the Kjelberg, which flows between Staten Island, New York, and Bayonne, New Jersey. This channel connects Newark Bay to the upper New York Bay. At the western side of this channel, near Bergen Point, New Jersey, was a rocky reef known to be hazardous to passing ships. Bergen Point Light was built on top of this reef to mark it. While Bergen Point was the lighthouse's primary name, it was noted as Kills Light on some historical maps in the late 1800s. The 1859 version of Bergen Point had a 2.5-story wooden dwelling for the lighthouse keeper and his or her family, containing a dining room, a sitting room, kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. The tower was made of granite, the lantern room equipped with a 4th order Fresnel lens, which replaced the previous 6th order lens, its light stretching a distance of 15 nautical miles. A rowboat and fog bell were also present at the lighthouse. While Bergen Point and Passaic River had similar structural designs, there is one instance they were different. Passaic River was connected to the shore by a pier, while Bergen Point was not, which created an isolated living situation. But 9 people still served as lighthouse keepers from 1849 to 1902. The list of reasons these keepers left included removal from office, transfer to a different lighthouse station, resignation, retirement, and passing away from illness. Born in Ireland, Robert Ray, also reported as Robert Gray, began his career in the U.S. Lighthouse Service in 1894. He was a second assistant lighthouse keeper at Stratford Shall in Connecticut. That same year, he was promoted to first assistant lighthouse keeper. He then transferred to Eaton's Neck Lighthouse in Long Island, New York in 1896. By the time he transferred to Bergen Point in January of 1902, he was promoted to principal lighthouse keeper at 30 years old, making $540 a year. Now, Robert was an unmarried man, but he didn't live alone at the lighthouse. His aunt, Mrs. Frances Kelly, and her 3 sons moved in with him. Even though this promotion was a highlight for Robert's career, his stay at the lighthouse would be short-lived. On February 15, 1902, Robert took the only rowboat at the lighthouse to pick up groceries on the mainland. While Frances waited for his return, she temporarily took over his duties, caring for the light in the tower and making sure the lantern room was spotless. With no sign of his return after a few days, Frances grew worried, especially as their food supply was dangerously low. She initiated a distress signal by hanging an upside-down American flag on the exterior of the lighthouse, which didn't catch the attention of any ships passing by. On the 7th day, the food supply completely ran out. It wasn't until the 9th day that Frederick Lumbrayer, a retired Bayonne policeman, was on the waterfront when he noticed the distress signal. He was able to row a boat through the icy channel to the lighthouse and rescue the family. Afterwards, Frances learned about the whereabouts of her nephew. On the day Robert left Bergen Point, his boat was caught in the icy flows of the Kjelberg, where he drowned. His body was later discovered by a group of boaters on their way to Shooter's Island. just west of the channel. In the aftermath, Frances became acting principal keeper of Bergen Point, serving about 30 days before a new keeper replaced her. Before we move on, I apologize in advance for any names I may mispronounce in this next upcoming sections. I tried my best to find the correct pronunciation, so please be patient with me. Okay, off to the stories we go. August Kjelberg was the next lighthouse keeper at Bergen Point, where he brought his new wife, Beuthe Lutzen, to live. He served for 4 years, but not without some trouble. In February of 1905, August was rowing his friend to shore at midnight. At some point during the journey, the boat overturned, dumping them into the icy Keel van Kol. For 2 hours, both men froze and clung to the keel of the boat, shouting for help. Fortunately, their cries were heard by a crew operating a Pennsylvania Railroad tugboat called Media. They were given warmth in the tug's engine room as they were taken to safety. Aside from almost drowning, August's service at Bergen Point was quiet. When he left in 1906, he continued his career at lighthouses, including Eaton's Neck, Tarrytown, Waycock Rear Range, and Hudson Athens, where he retired in 1930. John Carlsson succeeded August Kjelberg. Hailing from Finland, John had been in the lighthouse service since he was 28 years old. From 1903 to 1940, his assignments included working on the Sandy Hook lightship, lighthouse tender Luxembourg, Latimer Reef, Bergen Point, and New Dorp. Bergen Point was John's first assignment that allowed him to live with his family. In March of 1906, he was named principal keeper with an annual salary of $540. He moved into the lighthouse with his wife Anna and their daughter, Annie. Even though the lighthouse was in New Jersey state borders, Annie attended school in Staten Island, New York, rowing herself across the Keel van Kol, which made her a popular figure in local newspapers for her unique living situation. The Carlssons also rowed to Staten Island to pick up supplies and their mail. John was known for 2 acts at Bergen Point. In 1913, 2 boys took their skiff out to the Keel van Kol, where it capsized. John spotted the incident and rowed his boat to the pier as quickly as possible. Even though he was able to save one of the boys, the other drowned. In 1915, a nearby oil barge burned. John was able to ward off the flames before they could spread and destroy the lighthouse. He received a commendation for this brave act from the Secretary of Commerce. The family's time at Bergen Point ended around 1916, when John transferred to New Dorp Light in Staten Island, where he served for more than 20 years. He retired in 1940 and passed away at 83 years old in 1953. He was buried at the New Dorp Moravian Cemetery near the lighthouse. His wife later joined him in 1966 at the age of 94. As commonly said back in the day, his watch was over and the light was out. Hans T. A. Beuthe, born in Frankfurt, Germany, was the next and last keeper of Bergen Point Light. But let's rewind. In 1889, at 14 years old, Hans pursued a seafaring career, sailing around Europe and America. When he immigrated to the United States, he eventually became a deckhand on tugboats in the New York harbor during the early 1900s. With this new chapter in life, he settled in Stapleton, Staten Island, and married Mary Munsinger, who brought in 4 daughters from a previous relationship. They eventually had a son together named Theodore in 1901. Around the 1910s, Hans joined the lighthouse service as a seaman on a lightship. He was then transferred to Hog Island Shoal Lighthouse as a first assistant lighthouse keeper in 1914. 2 years later, he was promoted to principal lighthouse keeper, having a short stint at Romer Shoal until he eventually ended up at Bergen Point in 1916. Hans's time at Bergen Point was well documented. Much of what we know of his life came from his letters, periodic interviews with newspapers, and memories recollected by his granddaughter, Hilda Zembia, who was affectionately called Sugar. Throughout his 25 years at the Lighthouse, Hans and his wife raised their son, while their daughters, in their early adult years, lived on shore. The Beuthe family had 2 dogs, one named Nicky, and at a later time, a German Shepherd named PD, which stood for police dog. In terms of comfortable living, the lighthouse was not outfitted with gas or electricity. They used a radio for communication, kerosene for the lamps and cooking, stoves for heat, and rainwater for drinking. When it came to other necessities, they rode to Staten Island to pick up groceries, supplies, mail, and dropped off their son to school. As Theodore grew older, he eventually moved out and followed in his father's footsteps in working on tugboats. This left Hans and Mary to live a quiet and isolated life at Bergen Point, which they adjusted very well to. Many stories about Hans depict him as a gentle giant, diligent in his work, and generous with his home. He painted the lighthouse every summer to keep it looking pristine. His typical daily schedule included having dinner at 1 p.m. Afterward, he slept until 6 p.m. when he had a light meal, and then went to the tower to light the lantern and keep watch over it throughout the night. During Hans's early days at Bergen Point, the Kjelberg froze over in winter, allowing him to walk across it to shore. While being interviewed by the Bayonne Times, he recalled, quote, "I'll never forget the tough winter of 1917. It was frozen solid, so I walked over to Bayonne to buy some groceries. And when I got back, the river had broken up, and there I was stranded on the shore without any way to get back. I was 3 days trying to reach the light. My wife took care of things while I was away." End quote. In 1923, Hans saved a man who fell overboard the Julian C. Morin, a Morin Towing Company tugboat. In 1925, he saved and gave shelter to a stranded crew of men whose barge and tugboat ran aground on rocks near the lighthouse. Hans's work could be grueling, but that didn't interfere with his downtime. He didn't think watching movies or listening to the radio for pleasure were interesting. Instead, he played cards with his wife, wrote letters to family members, read books, and, most impressively, managed a stamp collection, of which he amassed over 30,000 stamps spread across different albums. He passed on his passion for stamps to his granddaughter, Hilda. Hans's children and grandchildren visited Bergen Point on weekends and in the summertime. During these visits, the family enjoyed swimming and boating around the lighthouse. Mary's always had hearty meals prepared and had kept extra clothing on hand in case they were needed. In the colder months, she warmed bricks on the stove and wrapped them in cloth to keep their feet warm. These retellings stir a romanticized view of lighthouse living, where the years were golden, life was peaceful, and the water was inviting. However, a series of events spanning from 1935 to 1951 marked the demise of Bergen Point. The River and Harbor Act of August 30th, 1935 authorized repairs and enhancements to certain waterways and harbors to preserve them. The Kjelberg was included as one of these projects, where it would be widened to accommodate the increase in shipping traffic. Another change took place in 1939. The maintenance of all lighthouses across the United States was transferred to the U.S. Coast Guard. They went to work in automating lighthouses, and for those that were still manned, replaced civilian keepers like Hans with Coast Guard personnel. The demolition of Bergen Point was announced on April of 1941 in preparation for the Kjelberg project, although these plans were delayed due to budget restraints in World War II. Regardless, Hans was transferred to Fort Wadsworth Light in Staten Island. He only served at the station for a year until his retirement in 1942, when he was severely injured from falling down the stairs. At the age of 67, on June 3rd, he passed away from his injuries. He was buried, like John Carlsson, in the Moravian Cemetery at Newark. His wife passed away 7 years later. After Hans left Bergen Point, the Coast Guard assigned a rotating staff to maintain the light in 12-hour shifts. 2 of these personnel allegedly took advantage of the lighthouse's isolated location in 1942. Okay, let's pause here. Information about the incident of 1942 is very sparse and I'm not sure of its validity, but I'll still mention what details I was able to find. In December of 1942, 2 Coast Guardsmen were accused of luring women from Staten Island to the lighthouse to perform heinous acts. I think you can fill in the blanks of what that means. The men were suspended from service and jailed. During the trial, a victim proclaimed that one of the keepers threatened to throw her down the stairs if she did not submit to his demands. The outcome of the trial isn't known, but the Coast Guard did subsequently fire and replace them. So, make of that what you will. There's mixed information on when Bergen Point began to be dismantled, somewhere between 1948 to 1951. What we do know is the exact date of when the lighthouse was completely demolished. Theodore Beuthe, son of Hans, who had since been nicknamed Teddy Lighthouse, had grown up and was captain of one of the tugboats owned by the Arundel Corporation, a company who was contracted to assist in the widening of the Kjelberg Coal and the removal of the lighthouse. Theodore was given the task of pressing the detonation button on his childhood home on June 19, 1951. Once the button was pressed, Bergen Point crumbled in an explosion of fire, smoke, and stone, ending nearly a century of loyal service to New Jersey and New York's waterways. Today, if you were to drive past Newark Bay, you'd never know that these lighthouses ever existed, as all traces of them are gone. But their stories and histories live on in those who remember them. But let's not end on a somber note. Instead, let's pull a quote from Hans T. Beuthe himself. Back in 1938, Hans gave an interview to the Bayonne Times about his life at Bergen Point. Quote, "There's no place I know of in the world I'd rather be than right here. People think it's lonely. Well, it is. That's why I like it. Some people even say it's uninteresting. They're wrong. I wouldn't swap this with any man ashore. It's peaceful, it's quiet, and there's never anybody to bother you. You just do your job." End quote. Thank you for tuning in to the histories of these lighthouses. Join me in the next video as we continue to explore lighthouse history and the stories of its keepers. Until then, happy lighthouse hunting.